Hi, Eddie. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me again. Today I'm going to do a quick little demo for you on turning a Spurdle with a skew. So today we'll be using a roughing gouge and a skew to finish this project. I'll talk about the presentation of the tool, how to use the skew. We'll turn a Spurdle, and it's a fairly quick project, so we could probably turn a Spurdle and a throwing dart as well. And then I already have my little target up here, and then I'll see if I can hit that target for you. So we'll have a little bit of fun today. So a Spurdle is a fancy stir stick. Originated in Scotland, and they would use a Spurdle or a wooden stir stick to stir their porridge. Now, the Italians have a version as well where they would turn their pastas and pasta sauces. It's basically a wood stir stick, can be shaped and beautified in any way, tapered with a rounded end so you don't scratch any of your pottery or any of your kitchenware. Now, when we think of making a spindle, we also need to think of the type of wood we're going to use. Now, this is oak, red oak. It's very porous. It has open grain. So this wouldn't be ideal to use this for a Spurdle because it will absorb some of the food, some of the oils, some of the stuff that you stir it with. So this would be more like a wand. I would sell this as a wand to a kid at a craft fair. Now, the Spurdles have similar shapes because I do them in a production run. I sell them as Spurdles, but also kids will buy them as wands, or boys will buy them as swords and hit each other with them. So the oak and red oak are specifically wands. Something out of walnut, again, I wouldn't use for a Spurdle because if someone has a nut allergy, it might transfer to the food, giving them an allergic reaction. So again, the walnut would have either a disclaimer saying nut allergy possibility, but to avoid any liability, I would likely just make these for wands for kids. So the wood I use for turning Spurdles are predominantly made out of hard, tight grain woods. So this is cherry. These are turned out of cherry. And this one is roasted maple, roasted curly maple. So this will have some really nice finish when I put some oil on it. When I finish a Spurdle, I only put a thinned oil on it, usually a linseed oil or a tung oil, maybe 1 or 2 coats, and then I leave it natural from there. I will put a beeswax finish on it after that, and at that, the customer is then responsible for maintaining it or waxing it or re-oiling it. Also, similar shapes to the Spurdle, I also make throwing darts or throwing spikes. Now these are made out of cherry and oak. I turned these this afternoon and did a little couple practice runs, practice throws, and this is shaped just like a Spurdle. Now when you do a throwing dart, it's much better to have that tapered end. So as you throw this and release it, it has a nice easy release into the target. And we don't really need to talk much about throwing darts, but we're going to turn one after we turn a Spurdle. So these are all turned between centers with my spur drive and my live center. All material is prepared at this piece of maple is 1.5 by 1.5. The cherry is roughly 1 inch by 1 inch, cut square. The length, I don't even know the length. I just cut them to what I thought a Spurdle should be long enough so you're not burning your hands with the steam. Now this is red oak. Now, I wouldn't use this for a Spurdle, but I would use it for a throwing dart or a wand. Again, 1 inch by 1 inch roughly. First thing we need to do, here I'll tell you the length. I have a tape measure here. Everyone can hear me okay? No interruptions?
It's gone fine, sir. A
Oh.
lot of folks have got their systems unmuted. And I'm trying to get to where I can mute everybody and bring you back on, but I hadn't got it worked out yet.
Okay, no problem. So the material here is cut to 1.5 feet in length. About 1.25 inches by 1.25 inches. It doesn't have to be exact because it's round after you turn it on the lathe. All right, the tool I'm going to be using today is a skew. Now the skew I prefer is a slight radius skew. There's different skews on the market. You have a round skew, a straight-sided skew, and a slight radius skew. When it comes to your skew, it really comes down to the preference of the wood turner. Now on my skew, you can see there's a little micro bevel because every time I use this, I don't go to the grinder. I hone my skew. People say, why would you hone your skew when it only takes seconds to go to the grinder? Well, it only takes seconds to hone it with a honing card, and I'm not removing metal, excessive amounts of metal. So believe it or not, this skew is over 11 years old, and I might have only lost maybe 1.5 inches. So honing will severely last your tools, will make your tools last a lot longer. Now this is a Benjamin's Best skew. It's not the best steel, it's not the worst steel, but it is a relatively reasonable entry-level type tool. And I use this in my demonstrations because you don't have to have the best of the best. It's not the tool that makes the turner, it's the turner that makes the turner. So really, as long as you have that angle right, you could use a knife as a skew. As long as you ride that on that angle, as it cuts on that angled cut, just the same as a skew would cut, okay? So it's all about the presentation and the way you use that tool. So first off, I'll remove these. We'll mount some wood in between centers. We'll turn a spurdle, and then we'll turn a throwing spike, and then I'll throw it and see if I can hit a target. Okay, so the spurdle, first things first, I'm not going to use oak because it's too porous. I would use either brown maple or cherry. I'm going to use cherry today. Find your centers, of course, with a center finder. Now, you can take a ruler and go corner to corner, corner to corner, or you can use a center finder, which I use. Now, I find the centers on all 4 corners just in case this piece isn't perfectly square, as we can see there. It's not perfectly square. So by finding your centers on all 4 corners, it enables you to find perfect dead center every time. You're not guessing the difference, okay? Do the same on both sides, and we can see, again, it wasn't perfectly square. Now, I've found my dead centers on both sides. I take an awl, I split the difference, and I make a small pinhole in those center marks. The reason I do that is because it's very easy to center afterwards. Now you see how easy that was? It stayed in the hole. This pin stayed in the hole as I brought up this end. If I didn't have those pinholes, I would be eyeballing to line up the center here to keep it in position, but then trying to balance this end as I brought up this end, it can be a bit of a balancing act. But in small stock, it's not really as crucial. You see, when you start getting into banister railings and table legs, when this distance isn't a foot, it's more like 3 feet, it compounds and you could be chasing your tail, trying to keep this perfectly centered as we bring this up center. But by having those pinholes, it finds center every time and it stays where it needs to be while I lock down my tailstock and I tighten my quill to bring that cup up to have pressure on that wood, which forces the wood into my spur drive. Now you want to have an ample bite by that spur drive because that is what's going to drive this piece of wood safely and efficiently. But more importantly, that's also what's going to keep this on the lathe if we're too aggressive, or if we get a catch, or if we present that skew wrongly, it slams down and gives us a catch. It will let you know what you did wrong. So we really need that to have an ample bite to drive this safely, efficiently, but more importantly, keep it on the lathe. So a good thing to do is sometimes lock your headstock in place, give this a little bit of a shake. That allows those jaw teeth to embed into that wood that much further. Give your tailstock an extra little 1/8 of an inch turn, embedding those teeth that much further, okay? Now, you don't want too much pressure because depending how thin we go, if we have too much pressure, this will start to whip on us. So we want to have just enough pressure to hold this in between centers so we can turn this without having excessive whip. But there are different things you can do to combat that, and I'll show you that today, okay? I'm going to be wearing earplugs today because wood turners often go deaf due to the sound of the motor and the chatter of the tool. Good thing I just checked that wheel to make sure my belt wasn't locked before I started that lathe. It would have squealed at me and it might have flattened one of my belts. So if there are any questions, yell them out. I'll be able to hear you. I'll stop the lathe, I'll take an earplug out, and I can answer your question, or we can save them till the end too. It won't be too long of a demonstration. Now the first thing I do is I set up my tool rest. And I guess this would be a better angle for setting up my tool rest. Now when I set up my tool rest, I set it up parallel to that wood corner. Now you don't want to be too close in case this is out of balance and not perfectly square, that when I spin it, it hits one of these corners. Now, but when we always set up our tool rest, we always give the piece of wood a spin because we don't want to just start the lathe, have one of these corners hit the tool rest, and then we have airborne wood that can come up and smack us in the forehead. It'll wake you up. Also, we don't really stand in that line of fire when we turn. We're off to one side or the other, so if it did come off, it might hit your shoulder, it might hit your chest, but it's not going to hit your neck, your face, your jaw, your eyes, and whatnot. Always keep your face out of that line of fire, okay? Now to start off, I'm going to round this with my roughing gouge, spindle roughing gouge. So spindle roughing gouge is only used to rough spindle stock round, square stock round as fast as you can. It's not a bowl roughing gouge, it's a spindle roughing gouge. So we never use this on a bowl, only spindles, okay? So when I use a gouge, I am using this gouge cutting at center, so my tool rest is below center as I make that cut, okay? We can see the height here. So as my tool is on the tool rest, in the far left corner, you can see I'm cutting at center to my live center, okay? Just move this a bit there. Here we are. Perfect. Okay, So now when we start roughing the piece, I'm going to throw my earplugs on, throw my face shield on. And whenever we start the lathe, we always stand off to one side or the other. Slow down the speed of the lathe, start the lathe. Oh, I guess I better turn it on first. That might help. So turn the speed of the lathe down. The project I was turning before, I was probably at 1400, so I turn it down to 7. Start the lathe. I'm not standing anywhere within that line of fire. Now I'm listening for a click, a crack, a wobble. It sounds like it's running really true. I don't hear any wobble, any hum, any clicks or cracks, so I know it's structurally sound wood. If I did hear any of that, I would shut down and I would then inspect the wood again. Inspect it for any cracks, any hairline cracks, any defects. Is it mounted between centers? Is it running true? It is, so I don't need to adjust it. Okay. Now, I have it mounted safely and properly in the lathe. Now it is a safe time for me to ramp up that speed to a speed that I feel comfortable with. People ask me what speed I turn at, and I tell them, right now I'm turning at 1100. But I always recommend turn at a speed that you feel comfortable turning at. Okay, everyone can still hear me with my face
We got
shield
you.
on?
We got you, bud. We got you.
Good, good. So now the first thing we do is we always anchor this tool to the tool rest before we engage that timber. Because if we don't, it'll hit the wood, it'll slam down to the tool rest, and you hope your hands or fingers aren't underneath it. It doesn't feel good, okay? So always anchor, ride the bevel. It's not cutting. Now we lift the handle to initiate the cut. Now we can see the shavings. Now we lock this into our hip, anchor it, and we move our body back and forth. Now this is what they call the wood turner dance. It's a lot better to lock those in, anchor it to your body and move your legs, because if I'm out here just using my arms all day, you're going to be exhausted. You're going to be fatigued. Your arms will get tired. And when we get tired and fatigued, that's when accidents happen. So let your legs do most of that work. Okay? Anchor, bevel, tilt it up. Now I can check to see if that's round by taking my tool and resting on top of the timber. Now it's lying flat, it's not flopping all over the place. So I know that this is running true. If my tool was bouncing all over the place, I would know that I needed to do one more pass to make that piece round, okay? I don't recommend taking your fingers and putting them on the wood, because if you hit a corner, it will jam your finger like a basketball or a football. But more importantly, you don't want to get thrown down in between the steel and the wood. The steel will cut, the wood will burn. Now it's okay to remove our tool rest, but always shut the lathe off first, okay? Now I'm using the skew. So when I use the skew, you want to be riding that bevel at 11 o'clock. Now I'll switch cameras. Now think of this, if this on the end here was a clock face, we'll say this is the end of our spindle. Now, if this was a clock face, this would be 12 o'clock. When we're turning, we want to be riding across that timber at 11 o'clock. And as that diameter gets smaller, you need to adjust your tool rest. So now my tool rest is above center. So now when I use this tool, I am planing across the timber at 11 o'clock to that clock face, okay? Now the first cut I'm gonna do is a planing cut. Now your planing cut, you ride on one of these corners. So if I'm going right to left, I'm on this corner and my toe is facing up, my heel is facing down. Now the high side's your toe, the low side's the heel. So if I have the heel down, I'm on that opposing corner and I'm planing across at 11 o'clock. Now if I'm going left to right, I switch it. Now I'm on the other corner, my toe is up, my heel is down, and I ride across the timber at 11 o'clock. Now that is a planing cut. I'm planing across the fibers, giving me a nice finishable finished surface, okay? And I'll do that now. So if I'm going right to left, anchor the tool, bring it back, line up the bevel.
Face shield's in the way.
Sorry, Eddie, did I hear something?
I always see the top of your face shield. You put your head out too far.
Oh, okay, thanks. Okay. Okay. So now when I use this tool, the cutting angle is 45 degrees to the wood. The tool steals 45 degrees to your tool rest. I'm cutting within that bottom third, that little sweet spot of that tool, and I ride across in this direction. So it's good to ride the bevel, bring it back, get that 45-degree angle. Now it starts to cut. Now I anchor it to my hip, and I ride that bevel across that surface. You can see I'm cutting in that bottom third. Now that is a finishing cut. You can see the difference between my roughing gouge and my planed skew cut. Much more sanding, far less sanding. Now if I come back this way, it's good to become ambidextrous and switch hands because sometimes the headstock can get in the way and it's quite awkward to stand over here and do it right-handed. So it's good to train yourself left hand. Find that sweet spot, ride that bevel, and plane across that surface. Okay? Now you can also do this with the toe. The only thing is, if I do it with the toe, I still need that 45-degree angle. So now the tool steel is more like, I don't know, 30 degrees, maybe 25 degrees to the tool rest. And I am still cutting in that bottom third. Okay, and so forth if I were to go this way as well. Slow and steady, let the tool do the work, let the tool do the cutting. We don't need to force it. because that's when you might run into surprises, go uphill, come under those fibers. But now we have a really nice finish on that piece of cherry. I might not even need to sand it, or I could start sanding and finish sanding at 320. Excuse me. So now we have our spindle round. Now we need to divide this into divide where our handle is going to be, where the taper is going to be. But we need to account for our live center pin. So we know that goes in maybe 1/4 inch, and the pin from our spur drive goes in 1/4 inch. So these two pieces are going to be scrap. Okay. So the first thing I do is I enter with the toe, and I just make an entry stop cut. Now I suppose you could do that with the heel. The only thing is, if we did that cut with the heel, we can't see over top of the toe, and we don't know exactly where it's cutting. And if we wiggle it slightly, skate across our piece, and we just created a beautiful spiral design we didn't want to create. Okay? Now I can show you how that spiral design happens too. Now if I'm planing across that surface, you want to stay on that bevel. The reason that spiral design happens is because I lift the tool up off of that bevel. Now we might be able to see that here. So if I'm planing across, I lift up off that bevel, skates away back in that direction. The same thing if I were to come this way. If I am turning, if I creep up off that bevel, it shoots me back in this direction. Okay? So if I'm turning, coming across, I lift off that bevel, it skated away on me. If I come across in this direction, come off that bevel, it skated away on me, right? That is how that spiral design happens. You want to stay on that bevel, stay within that sweet spot, and just allow that tool to do the cutting for you. Okay? So I always use the toe to make my entry cut because I can see over the heel. So I line it up with the line and I just lift the tool handle. All I'm doing in that cut is entering in and out, nice and quick, because that is the thinnest part of this steel. We don't want to keep it in that wood for too long because it will start to blue, it'll lose its temper, you'll have to sharpen it. So whenever I make those cuts, it's a quick entry in and out, in and out, in and out, okay? And I do that here as well, okay? Now I want to create a series of V cuts to remove the material to allow me to get in there to create the taper, but to also shape my beads and my thistle on top. So whenever I do a V cut, okay, I enter, exit. I'm still in that starting position. Now all I do, 45-degree angle, and I just lift the handle again. Lift the handle. To create that series of V cuts. Now I'll switch to this camera and I'll do it the opposite way. So I stay in that position, move here, and I just lift the handle. I go 45 this way, enter with the tip, and I just lift the handle. Now whenever I do this cut, I'm riding that bevel within that bottom third, that little sweet spot. We don't want to creep up to that center line and cut because if we do, it's going to catch that corner and it's going to skate away on us this way, creating another beautiful spiral design that we don't like to see. So I do the same series of V-cuts over here, starting at my starting point, 45, just lift the handle. Again. Now, when we make those V-cuts, you want to make sure you enter on that corner or at that 45 with the tip, ride that bevel down. If I try and enter and I'm offside slightly, it's going to skate on me. Or if I'm this way, oh, it's going to skate on me that way because I'm not entering straight on square to that surface. I'm cutting in on an angle which is going to skate across that curved surface following the curve of your skew, shooting you in a direction that you have it angled at. Okay, so we keep that straight, 45, lift the tool handle. Again, I can do it here, V-cut. And here I'm just going to do a cut to that line because I want that undercut. So you can make this cut with the heel and cut downhill. The only thing is it's hard to see that heel when we contact that wall. So it's much better using the toe because we can see exactly what it's doing at all times. Okay, now we have a rough shape.
You already had
This
a bag
is going to
made,
be
huh?
the spurdle and the taper down to the business end where we do all our stirring. Okay. Up here, we're going to have a thistle, a bead or a shape of some kind, and then a bead. You can make these shapes however you like. It just comes down to preference. Okay. And it's really good practice for your skew techniques, doing beads, coves, valleys, creating a taper. So the first thing I start with is the thistle. I'm going to switch to this camera angle so it's not too busy. And I start with the toe up, and I'm cutting downhill to where I created those series of V cuts, stopping at the bottom of that V. Now, when you use your skew, it looks like I'm about to play some pool. You don't have to have a death grip on your skew because if you do, it's a lot harder to move and maneuver it easily. I do understand why people do get a death grip on a skew in anticipation of that skate away or that catch. Now, one thing you always want to do is, if I am cutting in that bottom third, I am supported to make that cut in that bottom third. So I am riding this corner and I'm cutting in that bottom third. I'm not going to try and cut with that center point or the toe because I am not supported to make that cut there. If I transfer that cut from the bottom third to the center line or above, it's going to catch that wood and it's going to slam your tool down, digging that toe into the wood, giving you a okay? That is because I tried to use a side that wasn't directly supported by the tool rest. If I wanted to use the toe, I would flip it and I would use it so it's supported directly on the tool rest to make that cut. Okay. Now here I'm going to do another thistle, similar shape to this, and then a bead, and then create my taper. So again, I ride the bevel, cutting with that bottom third, and I am stopping where I created that stop cut. Okay. Anything else I'll clean up when I round that corner. Now I can round the tops of these thistles, similar to this shape here. Okay. Now to do a bead, you lie the tool, you're always on that corner, or this corner. Now that corner is your fulcrum, or your pivot point to maneuver that tool to create that bead. Okay? The only thing is we still always stay within that bottom third. Align the tool, ride the bevel, line it up to that 45 degree. We enter with the heel, and now I come down and around that corner and finish at the bottom of that cut where I just lined the bottom of my thistle. Okay? Now I can clean that up with a cut this way. And all these cuts are slicing cuts. They're not scraping cuts. So it significantly reduces our sanding, if any. This portion we can do now. Again, line up. You can enter with the tip of the toe. No, the tip of the heel. You can ride that bevel down to that third, stay there, and just cascade down and around that corner. Now, sometimes that's a tricky cut using the heel because as we come down and across, we lose sight of that heel. Sometimes, if you can't see it, you wiggle the tool and then catch, and it skates away in this direction because the curve catches that high side corner, throwing it back in that direction. If I did it this way, the curve of my skew would throw this right back into my spur drive. Okay. Now that's pretty much done. I don't need to touch that yet. Now I want to do the bead. But on the contrary there, where if I come across and I'm using the heel and I can't see the heel, when I first started to use the skew and I was learning the skew, I was taught to cut beads in this fashion. But I had one hell of a time staying on that bevel, riding that bevel down and around that corner because I would lose sight of the heel. So you can flip the tool and you can make that cut with the toe. This way, you can see exactly what you're doing at all times. You're riding the bevel, you're cutting with that bottom third, and you're pivoting up and around that corner. Just like that, okay? Until I forced myself to learn to do it with the heel down, and then at that point I understood why I'm getting catches. It all comes down to the way you present the tool and how you ride that bevel. You stay on the bevel because the moment you come off that bevel, it will skate. Now when we do a bead, over time, you won't have to mark that center line. But it is good practice in the beginning to mark that center line, because if you can start on this side of that center line, ride that bevel up and around that corner, and do the same on this side without removing that center line, and you have matching curves, you're off to the races. Now that'll be one of the hardest things to do, because if you're right-handed, you'll find your left side of your bead is much easier to complete than the left side, unless you become ambidextrous or you contort your body over here on this side of the tool rest to make that cut right-handed. Okay. Now when we do a bead, I ride the bevel and I ride it just on the left side of that line. Once I have that cut, I'm getting sawdust with the bottom third. I then hold it in place and I cut down and around that curve. I hit the bottom of my thistle, that's okay. I can clean it up later. Now I want to match that curve here, so I pick up the cut, remove that sharp corner, down and around that corner into that to create that bead. Now I can clean this and this up with my toe, giving me that crisp corner. And that crisp corner there. Now I have a bit of a lopsided curve. This curve is less, the right side of the curve is steeper than the left side of the curve. So I need to blend the two. That is when I start removing that center line to blend those two curves to match one another. And that will all come with practice and confidence. Here we go. Now my skew is getting dull. So I'm going to just hit it with a card hone. I start on one corner flat and I pull it towards me, coming across to the toe. Now slow down as you exit because we don't want to skate down and across our hand. And we do it on the opposite side too. Okay. Now we're sharp again. Oh, look at that. How a sharp tool cuts. And it only took seconds, just like it only takes seconds to go to the grinder. But I would have lost maybe a millimeter of steel if I went to the grinder. I might have lost a micron using my card hone. Okay, there. Now that's pretty good. You can be compulsive about creating those curves and matching them perfectly, but sandpaper is still a cutting tool and you can blend anything in between. I mean, the skew does significantly cut down your sanding by far, if any. But if you have some, even with that little slight tool mark, I can start sanding and finish sanding. Now, I could do this taper solely with my skew. It would take longer than if I used a roughing gouge. So I use a roughing gouge to create that taper, and then my final pass is with the skew to give me that nice finish, so I start and stop sanding at 320. If I were to do it with the roughing gouge and start sanding, I'd have to start sanding at 180. But by doing that one pass with the skew, it does severely reduce your sanding. So since I'm using the roughing gouge, I need to lower my tool rest below center again. So I am riding the bevel and I'm riding the bevel above center, but I'm cutting at that center line. Okay. Where am I? There I am. Okay, so just like before, we anchor. I'm gonna move this so I don't knock it on the floor. Freshly honed. Anchor, ride that bevel, lift the tool to initiate the cut. We see sawdust. And we do the wood turner dance. Now I'm being a little aggressive here because I still have ample thickness in the wood. As this gets thinner and thinner, I'll have to lighten up on my cut because it could get a whipping action. And if I get a whipping action, it's going to flex, come back, hit the tool twice as hard, and probably split in two pieces, bouncing off your face shield. Okay. Now I'm just creating a taper to start. I will refine that later with my skew. Now if you are getting more resistance and you're getting flexing, it's because the gouge creates a lot more drag when you use this tool. There's a lot more surface area in contact with the wood, creating more drag, which gives you more vibration and more flex. Now, if I angle this tool like a skew, and I make those cuts like this, now I have less drag, less resistance on that wood, less flex, and a much nicer finish. Okay? Now you can make this as thin or as thick as you like. Just keep in mind, the thinner you go, the more whip you will create. So now I have a couple lumps and bumps created by my roughing gouge. I can go through slowly to remove those and blend those high sides. Okay. But we can hear it flexing. You can probably even see it slightly. So I don't want to be too aggressive with that tool. Now I'm going to use my skew for my final cut. So I bring that tool rest back up. So I'm above center and I'm cutting at 11 o'clock. Now the diameter has changed significantly. So really, to ride at 11 o'clock on this surface, my tool rest is exactly at center. Whereas before, I was above center, so I was riding at 11 o'clock to this spindle height here. Is there any questions, sorry, in the chat? I saw... No? Alrighty. I'll just
We have
keep
some
going.
comments, but no questions. Let's roll right on through this thing.
Okay. Alrighty. So now my last pass will be with the skew. Now with the skew, this might flex on me. We can see it has some flex already. Now we want to ride that bevel, and if I only do it with the tool alone, this might flex coming back, catching the skew, might transfer to the toe, giving you a violent catch and breaking this in half. So one thing I do is I stick my tool behind the spindle here to support the flex in any way. I now hold my skew one-handed, supported by my forearm, and my finger. I reach around with my thumb and I support that tool to make that cut. And this will give me a nice sanding. And I just glide across that surface to give me a nice finished surface. Okay. Now I have a nicer finish where I have minimal sanding. Now all I need to do now is round this and remove the piece from the lathe. Maybe do some light sanding. So I do another entry cut with my toe, do a V cut, on either side.
Kade, somehow we got you muted, so will you unmute yourself? Kade? Kade, you with us still?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay,
Sorry.
now you're back. Somehow it muted. Never mind. Keep going.
Oh, must have got muted accidentally. But that's no problem.
No problem. We're back. We're rolling.
All right. All right. So I make my entry cut. I'm flat on this rectangular surface every time I make that entry cut. And then I angle 45 to that corner. Okay. 45 to this corner. And I now ride the bevel coming around that corner just as if it was a bead. Okay. Now I have that rounded curve on the bottom of my spindle, so that curve gets into the corner of those pots and pans without ruining, marking, or scratching your kitchenware. Now here, before I remove this more, I'm going to remove this to the same diameter, and we want to do this in steps. We don't want to remove 1 to a 16th off the hop, because as I remove this can be whipping around and it might break free. So we inch our way back to that 16th of an inch, and then we take the piece off the lathe. Now you can go to 1/8 of an inch, you can go to 1/4 inch. It's whatever you feel comfortable turning to. I feel comfortable going to a 16th. So I move over here. Now I need to remove some of the material here so I can get up and around that corner to shape the top of that thistle. Enter with the tip, ride that bevel down and around that corner, just like that. Now before I go any further, shut your lathe off before you move the tool rest. I would do some very light sanding there. This is 180. I had a couple spots where the skew went under the grain, giving me a little bit of tear out, but that's okay. This will go quick. Now I didn't have any tear out or anything on the top portion, so I can sand that at 240-ish. It is a utilitarian piece. It's functional, so it doesn't have to be pristine. It just has to be functional. I mean, you still want to see the nice wood grain without scratches across that grain. So take your time to do the sanding. But for a demo, I'm not going to do much sanding at all, because it's no fun to watch me sand. And when I would sand, I would be wearing a full respirator, and I would have my dust collection on. So that's good enough. This will be a wand, and I'll give it to my neighbor's kid. He'll be happy whether it's scratched or not. Okay. So now at this point, I have my piece turned, shaped, sanded. Now I just need to reduce these to a pin to remove the piece. Okay. And I do that with a series of V-cuts and V-cuts, and then I blend the shape and the curve, and then I part through. Okay. So I'm going to shape this end first. Up and around that corner. This one, I'll do some more series of V-cuts so I can get in there around that corner, just removing the waste material that's driven by my spur drive so I can get up and around that corner. Okay. So now I'm down maybe a 1/16 on either side. Now, one thing I can do now is I can take my thin kerf parting tool, which is right here. It's my fancy knife made into a thin kerf parting tool. I now remove that. Now, I don't want to go all the way through just yet. Okay. Here we go. Now I have 2 pins on either side holding this piece. So I do one very tiny cut with my skew and a tiny cut with my skew, and it just comes off just like that. It fell off, but that's okay. I just pushed a little hard in that final cut, but that's no big deal. At that point, I would just break that across the grain, because if I break it with the grain, it might go up under, making a hole underneath that surface. So I break it across the grain so it breaks above the surface, and all I do is blend that curve. And the same on the other side. There. And I would just blend that curve, and there we have our Spurdle.
That is a really nice project.
It's a really good project. It's very good for your tool control. Practice your cutting, your slicing, rather than scraping or plowing. And I mean, it's really good practice for all your tools: spindle gouges, roughing gouges, skew, all those fun things. So yeah, that's your Spurdle. And if you want, I could do one more, doing the throwing spike, but it won't take as long because I won't explain as much. It would just be really seeing me do it, possibly in real time.
What do you think real time would be?
It'd be a little quicker because I wouldn't have to explain anything.
All right, let's rock.
Yeah,
Say
go
again?
for it. Go for it. I want to
Yeah,
see
rock
you
and
throw
roll.
something.
Rock and roll. I see Brenda's back with us tonight. I mean, she was gone for a little while. Can I do something for Brenda here while you're setting up? Kade?
Yep.
Well, I want to show Brenda something while you're setting up, sir. you don't mind, I can.
Yeah, that's totally fine. No
Because
problem.
Brenda, we take everything around here so serious. And Ronnie had a little bobo this week, so we put Ronnie in the Brenda's Band-Aid Brigade. He's a charter member now, Brenda.
Yes, I came back just as you had that on the screen.
Okay.
I missed the story, but I caught that. Yeah.
Well,
Love
Good.
that one, Brenda.
Y'all
Yeah.
have to in on the story. I don't know that one yet.
Ronnie was turning something up too. Literally, the wood got a little aggressive on him. Not him. The wood got a little aggressive, and Chip came out and bounced right off his mask.
my.
Because we were talking about doing your preventive, wearing your preventive protection gear and your PPE, and it worked out quite well for him at that one. All right, let's. I gotta get
Now that that's been around the world,
at least once, maybe twice.
Exactly.
You can go back to Kate, Eddie.
Yeah, let's go back to Cade. Cade, you're back up again, sir. You're muted. There you go. Nope.
I'm talking and you can't hear me. I guess I got to unmute myself again. But yep, it's all sharpened up again.
Just take seconds on a diamond card.
Yeah, few seconds with that diamond card, and I lost no steel at all.
Right.
Still on the floor,
your
it's not
tools
free.
will last forever. I did get a Thompson gouge for Christmas, but the way this is going, I mean, that one will last me. I'll be taking that one with me.
Cade, what grid is that diamond card you used?
That diamond card, 600 mesh.
Thank you.
Yeah, 25 micron or 600 mesh. Yeah, and that is one I bought off Amazon. It's just called the Diamond Sharpening Card. Off Amazon, it was very reasonable, fairly inexpensive. I also have bought the Trend. Now the Trend card comes with 300 on one side and 600 on the other side. But this card, you're looking at probably $40, $50 Canadian. So 40 Canadian would be maybe 33 US. This one was under 20 bucks.
I'm not going to badmouth anybody's product, but if you think you can beat that at Harbor Freight, think about the quality of the tool you're getting, because it's getting big lumps on it. It might be rated 300, but if it's not done well, it'd be cutting at 200.
Yeah,
So-
Yes.
Not all cards are made equally. I know I've bought a lesser quality one, and the diamond material that was attached to the metal portion of the card, it just peeled right off.
Yeah, I do notice that this one does wear much quicker than the Trend one. The reason I bought both of these was I had a Trend one and I used it all the time, but I put it somewhere, lost it. I went and bought both of these, and of course I found it. So I put the two Trend aside until this one is done before I go back to the Trend one. But I do notice that the area that I use excessively has worn away much more than the Trend one. So you do get what you pay for.
Yeah,
So
go cheap, get cheap. That's it.
Yeah. But I've been using this for probably, I don't know, 8 months. So for under 20 bucks, it's
What
still a good
brand was
bang for
that,
your
Cade?
buck, I guess. All right. Now let's make some chips, and I'll whip through this fairly quick. Now when we do a throwing dart, I mean, this one I did with the Spurdle shape. It's a lot harder to throw because we have all these ribs. It's much easier to throw when you have a round surface or a slightly tapered surface, because it comes off your hand that much easier. It doesn't have all these lumps and bumps to throw it off as you throw it, okay? So I'm gonna do something similar to one of these.
Okay,
This
let's
one
go.
I experimented with this morning because the weight's on this end and it throws really nicely. But I've also made metal ones. I just make wood ones as well to practice with. Oh. So here's a set of metal ones. Okay. And here is another set of wooden ones. Now this is a Bagakay, which is Philippines throwing weapon. They would hunt small game and birds and stuff with it. This is your Japanese throwing darts, which are much smaller, and they were used by samurais, and they would have them on their hip and throw them in battle.
So what distance are you throwing them, and why don't they rotate when you throw them?
Pardon, Matt? Sorry?
At what distance are you throwing them from, and why don't they rotate while you throw in the air?
Well, you can throw them two ways. You can do a spin throw, or you can do a no spin throw.
Okay.
Now, if you do a spin throw, I need to calculate the length of the dart, the distance I am away from the target, and how many revolutions this is going to make before it sticks the target. So it's a little harder to do your spin throw.
Right.
But if you do a no spin, there's no calculations because it's thrown the same way every time. So a no spin throw,
I'm going to need to see that.
I'll show you.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it.
A no spin throw is thrown like a shuriken, like this. And the samurai would throw it like that, right? And then they release it, stroke the back, so it goes through the air and sticks into the target. Now, depending the distance you are away from that target, depends when I release this, whether it's released here or it's released here to hit the target, because it's no spin. So it flies through the air like this. Now, the world record for a no spin throw is 30 meters into a target the size of my head, okay? The world record for a spin throw, I think, is 25 meters into a target the size of your head, okay? So.
Thank you for the details. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm working on this. Ronnie, put up your, see, Ronnie, I can see you from here. Put up your right hand and we'll try it. All right, and hold it there. It's coming.
Yeah, so here I'll turn this and then I'll throw those spikes at that target.
Okay, let's go. I have Paul Hannaby in the background for when we get this done. We're going to do a few moments of gallery because we have some stuff popping up, and then we'll probably do a look at that threaded box that Paul started with us last week. How's that?
Perfect. I look forward to seeing it. All right. So first thing, set up your tool rest below. We're going to use the rough and gouge quick. Oh. Little too aggressive, but that's okay. Oh.
While Dane's making these cuts and you can see it, I want to mention a couple of items here. This week I caught Doug Miller's YouTube on doing stemware. It was very, very informative and very well done. If you hadn't seen it, look it up on YouTube, Doug Miller. Cade's got some videos on YouTube that are updated this week, and he's also got 2 demonstrations coming up. You can catch him. Josh Smith has created some coins with our wooden coins on this laser engraver. It tells about the club, how you can get onto it, join.
Oh, sorry. Had no idea.
By riding that bevel, he's getting a slicing cut. You see that, folks? He's sliding on that bevel on rough and gouge.
Now you don't want the tip to be too pointy, because if it hits the ground, you don't want to have to resharpen the whole tip. So it's almost got a few tapers on it. So it's not too pointy that if it dulls, you lose the whole tip and you need to resand the whole tip. Excuse me. Nice tapered handle, runs off your hand really nicely. Okay. Now we remove a little bit more over here. We're finding that tip, that point. Okay. Take that down to maybe a 1/16. There. And take this down to about a 1/16. About there. I would shut off the lathe, remove my tool rest. I would sand this slightly so it removes, it flows out of your hand nicely. The handle is a little big and chunky for me, but it will throw the same. That's good enough for sanding. There we go. There we go, almost there. One last pass. There. Now all we do is remove your tool rest. That breaks off above the surface. We have a nice point. We break that across the grain, keeping our sharp point. I would now sand that off just around it so I have a nice curve for my hand to flow out of as I release the throw. And there. Now I need to sharpen this slightly, and I do that with sandpaper. And if it hits the concrete floor, all I need to do is do this again. Okay. Now there is our throwing spike, much larger than I would normally make, but it will throw just the same. So over here is my little target. I'm going to sand on the opposite side of my shop, which is about 14 feet away. And I will throw these three, and we'll see if I can make them stick. I did earlier. Okay. So I'm going to do a no spin throw. So I'm over there, and I am throwing like this, and I release it so it comes through the air into the target. That's the throw. I prefer a no spin throw because I don't have to calculate the distance, the revolutions before it hits the target. You can throw it from that side, this side, that side. The throw is always the same.
Sounds like it takes practice.
It's just
to get
harder
right.
to do. It's a
Sounds like
harder
it takes-
learning curve. Okay.
Sounds like it takes practice to get right.
Yeah, takes a lot of practice. Yeah. So here's one. It's another one. Oh, another one. Try those again.
I totally got to try that.
I think this is rather dangerous, giving woodturner something sharp to throw.
Okay, can you swing your camera so we can see the release?
I don't think I want the wife to see this. I'll be dodging frying pans and these bullets.
Okay,
Yeah,
can you
I
swing
can move the camera so you see the
So-
release.
Yeah, don't make her a set of these, Ronnie. It's not a good idea.
No, I'm thinking the same thing. Thank goodness she's in the next room.
Exactly.
These would be great Mardi Gras throws.
So the release will be like this. Okay. That one missed. That one hit, but didn't stick. Of course, pressure.
Very
So that's the
educational.
release.
Ronnie, I'll make a couple steel ones and send them to your wife.
There we go. That's stuck. That's stuck. Got it.
Ronnie, you could just give her your skew and you would need to make one of these.
Yeah.
Cade, that
Quite
was,
fun.
Right on, Kate.
yeah, that was a fun demonstration
It
and very
was.
informative.
Thank you.
We had somebody say, can you do that with a
Thank you,
skew?
Cade.
And that was, Brent asked, can you do it with skew? Yes, that's excellent skew practice. You're looking at planing cuts, but you don't have to use the roughing gouge to rough it in. If you can do that with one tool, you get there the good sharp 3/4 inch wide skew.
You
Go
may
to
be talking
town.
about throwing your skew like that.
Oh, wow. I thought you meant, can you turn it with a skew?
Yeah, I want video. If you do that, Brent, I want video, man.
I have thrown my skew, but I don't
Thanks,
want
Cade.
it to hit this or go through this because then my stuff's there.
Thanks,
But I
Cade.
could
Great,
throw my
great demos,
little
Cade. Thank you.
jackknife here.
Throwing my skew too out of frustration.
Thank you, Cade. Very much appreciated, sir. And folks, see more of Cade's demonstrations. He's got them on his website, kadebolger.com. And that's where you can find him at. Cade, again, thank you, sir.